If any part of this story resonates with you, if you've ever sat at a table where you weren't seen, weren't heard, I want you to know you are not alone. Maybe this is the sign you've been waiting for, the one that tells you to stop sitting where you're not valued. I found myself seated right next to the trash can at the Mitchell family dinner, and my mother Karen leaned across the table, her wine glass hovering just below her chin, and told me it was symbolic. Yeah, that was the actual word she chose, symbolic. For a second, I just sat there staring at her like she'd spoken in a language I didn't understand. The scent of overcooked casserole clashed violently with the sharp chemical tang of Lysol in the air, filling the room with a nauseating blend of fake comfort and control. My hands gripped the edge of the scratched-up wooden table cheap. Like everything in this house, always tried to pretend it was more than it was, pressing into my palms, just to remind myself I was still tethered to the ground, because inside everything felt like it was floating away. Karen gave me one of those smiles she'd perfected over the years, thin and brittle, stretched just enough to pass for polite in front of company, but cold as ice underneath. "You throw out what's broken," she added, like she was talking about the weather or the sale price on laundry detergent. And then Dad Robert gave that awful chuckle of his, that deep, hollow sound that never meant amusement, only judgment, like he didn't need words to say what he thought of me. "She's been broken for years," he muttered, not even looking up from his plate. For a few heartbeats, I forgot how to blink, forgot how to breathe. All I felt was my stomach plummeting, like I'd stepped into an elevator shaft with no floor, just free falling into nothingness, reaching out for anything solid and finding nothing but empty air. I glanced around the table, hoping anyone would break the silence. But Blake, my brother, was already absorbed in whatever was flashing on his smartwatch, thumbs tapping away like the dinner around him didn't exist. Brittany, his perfect, always camera-ready wife, didn't even pause in arranging the roasted carrots for her next Instagram story, #FarmTotable, no doubt. Grandpa Walt, the only one who used to make this house feel warm, just kept chewing. Slowly, eyes fixed on his plate, his jaw working methodically, like maybe if he focused hard enough, the food would teleport him somewhere far away. And then there was my daughter, Emily, sitting next to me in her favorite sparkly unicorn sweatshirt, curly hair tied into two uneven pigtails, her small hands cupping a plastic cup like it was the only thing grounding her. She looked up at me, those big brown eyes of hers, wide and confused, and something in them hurt me in a way words can't describe. I couldn't hold her gaze. Not like that. Not when they were treating me like garbage and she was right there soaking it in. So I tried to laugh it off, that empty, brittle sound we all learn to fake when we don't want to crack open in front of the people who've been rooting for us to shatter. "Well, I guess I'm the lucky one," I said, forcing a smile that felt like sandpaper against my lips. "I get the special seat with the breeze from the trash bin." I nudged my chair a little, like I could play along, like I was still someone who could laugh this off. No one laughed, not even out of courtesy. Karen just turned to Grandpa Walt, refilling his gravy, like I hadn't just been publicly tossed out with the garbage. My cheeks burned. It felt like every inch of my skin was on fire, blushing with humiliation, like the heat was radiating from inside my bones. A bead of sweat rolled down my back, which made no sense because the house was freezing, but of course it was. Karen always cranked the AC for these dinners, claiming it kept people alert. Really, it was just another way for her to control the room, to make sure no one got too comfortable, to make sure no one forgot who held the power. I looked down at the plate in front of me. Mashed potatoes, limp green beans, and a slice of turkey breast so dry I thought it might turn to dust if I poked it too hard. It all looked gray, lifeless, like it had been sitting out for hours, which, knowing my mother, it probably had. I stabbed at a green bean, watching my fork move, but not feeling like it was really my hand holding it. In my head, the same old loop of thoughts started playing. Why did I come here? Did I really believe this dinner would be different? That they'd actually see me, hear me, maybe even miss me? I told myself this was a step toward healing. After the divorce, I had distanced myself from the Mitchell family, not with grand declarations or slammed doors, but through a quiet, almost imperceptible withdrawal. I had faded from the family group texts, made excuses to skip gatherings, allowed birthdays to pass without calls. It was easier that way. There had been too much judgment, too many murmured conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room, the kind of whispers that hung heavy in the air, long after the words themselves had faded, infecting the walls of the house like mildew. But through it all, I missed Grandpa Walt. I missed those lazy Sunday dinners where laughter bubbled up naturally, not the forced brittle kind that echoed off the cold walls of this house now. I ached for the warmth of those days when the food wasn't just sustenance, but a gathering of hearts. I told myself maybe, just maybe, things could return to that. Maybe they missed me too. But I was foolish. It wasn't me they missed. It was the compliant version of me, the Jessica who knew when to bite her tongue, who offered apologies like candy, even when she knew she was right, the version who tucked herself into a shape that fit their narrow mold. Now here I was, planted next to the trash can, like some discarded relic, a breathing piece of garbage that Karen felt the need to make into a living metaphor. My jaw tightened, the muscles clenching hard enough to ache. Then beneath the sterile white tablecloth, I felt Emily's small hand find mine. Her fingers were soft, her grip gentle yet unwavering, and in that fragile touch something stirred in me, a flicker of something old and buried, the faintest rumble of resistance. Emily wasn't just sitting there absorbing this like the others. She was watching. She was preparing to speak. And in that space between heartbeats, I understood that whatever she said next would change everything. The walls of that house, the roles we played, the silence that had governed every meal, they would all come crashing down. It's a peculiar thing, isn't it? The way you can step into a house you grew up in, surrounded by the faces etched into every photo on the mantel, yet feel like a trespasser in your own story. That sensation pressed into me the moment Emily and I crossed the threshold of my parents' house that evening. The place smelled exactly as it always had, a clashing medley of pine-scented cleaner and the stale remnants of cigarette smoke woven into the curtains from decades of neglect, overlaid now with Karen's signature garlic bread, its aroma masking but never fully erasing the rot beneath. Somewhere in the background, Sinatra's crooning voice trickled from the ancient speakers in the dining room. Robert insisted it added class to dinner, as if Frank's velvet tones could gloss over the cracks in our porcelain family. Nothing had changed. Not the house, not them. Only me. I hadn't crossed this threshold in nearly a year. Not since Jason and I had split in that ugly, bone-deep kind of divorce that people gossip about behind coffee cups and church pews. Except in my family, there was no pretense of secrecy. They judged with wide open mouths and louder voices, and when I dared to refuse their verdict, they pushed me out, not with shouts or ultimatums, but with a colder, sharper kind of rejection erasure. But I came back, for Walt, for his 80th birthday. Emily had poured her heart into making him this wild, glitter-drenched card-smiling faces and rainbows, 2 hours of her tiny hands working with glue sticks, and hope. How could I deny her that I told myself this night would be different? Enough time had passed, surely. Maybe their hearts had softened. Or maybe I was just lonely enough to believe in fairy tales I should have long outgrown. We stepped into the kitchen first, and there she was, Karen in her element, barking orders like a 5-star general overseeing a battlefield of mashed potatoes and overdone turkey. Blake was already 2 glasses deep into his favorite Cabernet, his laugh echoing too loud too soon as he swapped jokes with Brittany, who, true to form, greeted me with a smile that glittered like spun sugar, but held the same nutritional value. "Wow, Jessica, you look brave," she said, her lips barely curling upward, the words dipped in the kind of saccharine contempt only someone like her could deliver. It was influencer speak. I realized brave being code for, "I can't believe you left the house looking like that." I matched her tone, forcing a smile that didn't touch my eyes. "Thanks, Brittany. You look filtered." The jab landed, and Blake's snort of laughter was enough to make the petty victory feel almost worth it. Dad Robert sat in the living room, glued to the football game on TV, pretending to care about the score, when we both knew he'd tuned in purely for the optics. When I entered, he acknowledged me with a curt nod, the kind you'd give an old colleague you couldn't quite place but didn't want to offend. No hug, no good to see you, Jess, just that sterile, empty nod. But when Grandpa Walt saw me, he beamed. He rose from his chair, slower now, his knees protesting with age, but his voice still rich with the warmth I remembered. "There's my girl," he said, arms open wide, trembling slightly but still sturdy enough to wrap Emily into them as she rushed forward, squealing as she always did when she saw him. The room was already taut with tension, but no one else seemed to feel it yet. No, they were too busy setting the stage, polishing the script they'd written before I even arrived. The table was already laid, the long, worn wooden one that had been the backdrop for every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every forced celebration since I was 10. And that's when I saw it. My seat. A folding chair, low, off-kilter, no cushion, no name card, tucked neatly next to the kitchen's swinging door, and worse yet, stationed directly beside the trash can. I paused, the air thickening in my lungs. Karen caught my gaze across the room, all faux innocence, as she gestured casually. "Oh, I figured you'd want to be close to the kitchen. You know, in case Emily needed anything. Because in her world, a woman without a husband was a woman with no identity beyond servitude." I swallowed down the bitter reply curling on my tongue. Not yet. I helped Emily into her seat, smoothing the creases in her dress with shaky fingers, then lowered myself into that wobbly folding chair, already knowing I had made a mistake coming here tonight. And I hadn't even taken my first bite yet. But it wasn't until Karen uttered that final piercing comment, that smug offhand, "It's symbolic," that the realization struck me like a slap across the face. They hadn't merely set a table tonight. They had staged a carefully choreographed performance, and I was the unwitting centerpiece of their theater of cruelty. Except this time, I wasn't reading from the worn, compliant script they'd written for me. I kept repeating to myself that it was just a chair, a flimsy folding chair tucked beside the kitchen's swinging door, parked next to the humming, stinking trash bin. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a threat. It was nothing. And yet my body knew otherwise in the way the skin along my arms prickled and my shoulders curled inward as if bracing for an invisible blow. My hands fidgeted in my lap, restless, twitching, aching to do something to fight or flee, though I sat frozen, a monument to my own denial. I wasn't cold, far from it, but still I rubbed my arms, desperate to wipe away the invisible residue of shame that clung to me like oil. Dinner unfolded, with Karen conducting the evening's dialogue with the precision and cold detachment of a maestro leading an orchestra of hollow pleasantries and razor-thin smiles. She directed every conversation, every glance, every laugh, ensuring they stayed within the rigid parameters of her control. She opened with Blake fawning over his latest real estate acquisition, as though he'd just discovered a cure for cancer, her words syrupy sweet, but laced with sharp undertones of pride. Brittany Ever, the social media queen, took center stage, next boasting about the 50,000 followers she had amassed for her wellness blog, her face glowing with artificial self-satisfaction as she posed beside her quinoa salad. Every time I spoke, my words seemed to drop into an endless black void, vanishing into the dark expanse of indifference. No replies, no nods. Just the suffocating weight of silence wrapping tighter around me like a noose. And then came the question. Karen, slicing into her roast chicken with surgical precision, didn't even lift her eyes as she delivered the line with the same disinterest she might apply to discussing the weather. "So, Jessica," she said, her knife gliding effortlessly through the meat. "Are you still working that call center job?" Still. The words scalded like acid on raw skin, insinuating my life was a holding pattern, a waiting room where I lingered until someone or something rescued me. I forced my voice into steady neutrality, though the words tasted like ashes. "Yeah," I replied carefully, placing my water glass back on the table with trembling hands. "I'm still there. It's steady. Pays the bills." Brittany couldn't resist piling on, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Oh, that must be exhausting. Angry people screaming at you all day, I'd cry." Robert, without lifting his gaze from his plate, grunted. "She's been crying for years," his words sliding across the table like poison, drawing a snort of laughter from Blake, while Walt merely frowned his fork, pausing midair, as if the food had suddenly lost its appeal. The laugh burst from me before I could swallow it, bitter and sharp, tinged with the acrid taste of self-defense masquerading as humor. "Glad to see the family still keeps dinner feeling like an intervention," I muttered, the words tumbling out too fast, too raw. Karen didn't flinch. She never did. Her smile, cold and rehearsed, remained fixed in place. "We're just concerned, Jessica. You've changed. You used to have such promise." Promise. That word hit harder than I expected, slicing through the layers of numbness I'd wrapped around myself. Promise, as if my only value had been in what I might become, not who I already was. as if I was a stock in their family portfolio that had plummeted, a bad investment they regretted ever nurturing. Emily, silent until now, looked up from her plate. Her fork hovered mid-air. She could feel it too, the shift, the moment when the evening slipped from uncomfortable to something far uglier. I tried to steer it back. God help me. I should have let it burn, but instead I clung to the wreckage. Well, I said, forcing a brittle smile, some people's definition of success looks different. My hands trembled as I gripped my glass again. Mine looks like raising a good kid. Getting through the week. Therapy. Silence swallowed the table whole. No polite laughter, no acknowledgments, just the hollow roar of nothingness. And then Karen, with that saccharine voice she used when she wanted to really twist the knife, leaned forward slightly. That's exactly what I mean, sweetheart. You used to be filled with ambition. Now you sound like a woman who's given up. I stared at her, every muscle in my body, tight as piano wire, words forming on my tongue, only to dissolve before they reached my lips. From the outside, I must have looked pitiful, slumped in that ugly folding chair, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, supposed to protect me. People who had instead turned me into an object lesson in failure. And then came the moment that shattered the entire facade. Karen, with mock innocence, pointed lazily toward my chair. I placed you there on purpose, Jess. It's symbolic, really. You throw out what's broken. Blake raised his wine glass, laughing like it was the best joke of the night. That's poetic. And Robert, never missing a chance to wound, added without hesitation, she's been broken for years. And with that, the world collapsed into a singular tunnel of sound, heat, and humiliation. I didn't cry, not here, not in front of them, but my throat clenched shut, strangling my breath, and my vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer weight of disbelief. They meant it, every last word, and then I felt it. Emily shifting beside me, the scrape of her little legs against the chair as she pushed herself up. Confused, I turned toward her. Emily, I whispered, reaching for her hand. But she ignored me. She stood on her chair, barefoot, wobbling slightly, but rooted in something older and fiercer than her 8 years should allow. Her chin jutted forward, her eyes burning bright and unflinching. I knew that look. It was the same one I used to see in the mirror before I forgot what I was fighting for. At first I thought she was reaching for a napkin, maybe whispering a question. But no. She clenched her tiny fists at her sides, her plate pushed aside like she needed room to plant herself. The entire table froze. Even Karen, mid-chew, paused, her fork hovering in the air sauce, dripping unnoticed onto her pristine white tablecloth. The room held its breath. And then Emily opened her mouth, and with just 5 words, she set fire to everything they had built. My heart plummeted heavy and cold, straight into the pit of my stomach, anchoring me to the spot, as if the weight of it alone might keep me from falling apart completely. Emily. I breathed, my voice more plea than command, reaching toward her with a trembling hand under the table. Sweetheart, sit down. But she didn't. She stood her ground, or rather stood on her chair, barefoot, wobbly but unyielding, her small frame, vibrating with a defiance I recognized in my marrow. Her lips quivered, betraying the fragility of her age, but her eyes, God. Her eyes locked onto Robert's with a ferocity that silenced the room more completely than any scream could have. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft, yet unwavering, the quiet kind of courage that splits through years of suffocating silence. If she's trash, she said, chin tilted high, then why do you keep her picture in your wallet? The air in the dining room fractured. The hum of the AC roared too loud. In the sudden stillness, a fork clattered to a plate somewhere in the distance, and a chair leg scraped across the hardwood floor with the kind of violence that felt almost obscene in the hush that followed. I stared at her, stunned into stillness, my breath catching in my throat because I had no idea what she meant. Robert blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face for the first time all evening. What he managed, though, the word sounded strangled, like it got stuck somewhere between his pride and his throat. Emily, undeterred, held up her tiny palm, her fingers forming the invisible frame of a photo. The picture of her, she said simply, her tone steady as she pinned him beneath her gaze. You showed it to me once. You said it was your favorite. The color drained from Robert's face, only to return as an angry, blotchy red, the kind of red that stains not from a lie, but from the naked exposure of a truth you thought you could keep buried beneath decades of bravado. His mouth opened, then closed, the words failing him for once. With hands that shook despite himself, He reached for his weathered wallet, tugging it from his back pocket, like it weighed more than he remembered. His fingers fumbled as he flipped it open, moving slower than usual, as if he dreaded what he might find, but there it was. Tucked into the clear sleeve behind his license, yellowed at the corners from years of neglect, was a photo I hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime. It was me. Taken on the day Emily was born. My hair a tangled mess, dark circles under my eyes. No makeup, no filters, just me, raw, exhausted, and cradling her, like she was the only light left in a world that had collapsed around me. And in that picture, I was smiling wide and unguarded like I had stumbled upon something sacred. Robert stared at it, the lines of his face hardening while the others did the same. Karen's expression soured her lips, tightening into a thin slash, her authority bleeding from her like a deflating balloon. She hated being caught off script. That doesn't prove anything. She sneered, reaching for her wine glass with a trembling hand, her veneer cracking around the edges. But the room had already changed. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It pulsed with something sharper, electric, brimming with all the things they couldn't unsay, couldn't unsee. My daughter, my fierce small warrior, had carved a jagged hole straight through their carefully constructed narrative with nothing but one pure pointed sentence. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not pride exactly. No, it was deeper than that. It was recognition, a long-lost piece of myself reflected back at me through Emily's blazing defiance. I saw the version of me I had abandoned, the one who once dared to stand tall in the face of cruelty. I stood legs, stiff joints aching from sitting in that rigid, submissive posture for too long. "Thank you, Emily," I murmured, my voice soft, but ringing with a finality that filled the room like a clap of thunder. I placed a hand gently on her small back. "You can sit now." She obeyed, lowering herself slowly, but she never broke eye contact with Karen, never blinked, never softened. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table or hurl my plate against the wall as I had fantasized 1,000 times. I didn't need to. I simply looked at each of them one by one, the family who had spent years defining me, confining me, branding me with their labels, and for the first time I felt no compulsion to explain, to justify, to apologize. "I think we're done here," I said, my voice low but heavy with the weight of a decision long overdue. And that was enough. Walt gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod, the kind that whispered, "Finally, girl." I helped Emily down from her chair and took her hand, warm and certain, in mine. I didn't bother grabbing my coat. I didn't offer polite farewells or hollow apologies. I walked out barefoot and steady, carrying more strength in my bones than I had arrived with. Because this was no longer about a chair at the table. This was about refusing to sit at tables where love came with conditions, where acceptance was a transaction. The night air embraced us like a balm, cool and unapologetic, the stillness outside honest and pure. No artificial AC chill, no empty flattery, no suffocating expectations. Just the hum of cicadas in the distance and the faint grounding scent of damp grass and hydrangeas. It was the kind of peace I had forgotten existed, the kind of peace that lived outside their walls. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding my breath until I finally let it go, a deep, shaky exhale that echoed in my chest like the sound of chains breaking. My grip on Emily's hand loosened, but she held tighter. "You okay, Mama?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, pulling me back into the moment. I crouched down beside her on the splintered porch steps, knees brushing the rough wood, our eyes level. Her small face held a seriousness that broke my heart, but beneath it shimmered something else, entirely certainty. I tucked a stray curl behind her ear, brushing the soft strands with gentle fingers. "I should be asking you that," I whispered. She shrugged as if what she had done was the most natural thing in the world. "They were mean," she said simply. So I said something, like it was nothing, like standing in the fire didn't cost her a thing. But that's the magic of children. They haven't yet learned how to dilute the truth with politeness or wrap cruelty in lace. They see, and they say what they see. And tonight Emily had seen me. She saw the part of me I had tried to bury so deep even I had almost forgotten she existed. I sank onto the porch, fully pulling her into my lap. She laid her head against my shoulder like she used to when the world still felt soft and safe. And there, in that quiet, sacred moment, I felt it not rage, not humiliation, not defeat. Power. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout or burn bridges. The kind that seeps deep into your bones and whispers, "You walked through the fire. And you're still standing." I had spent years bending, shrinking, contorting myself into the shape they found acceptable. And in the end, all it took to unravel their carefully woven illusion was 5 words from an 8-year-old girl with a spine they never saw coming. That night, once the hush of our tiny apartment settled around us like a worn blanket, I tucked Emily into bed, smoothing the blankets around her small frame as she curled tightly around her stuffed unicorn, its sequined horn catching the dim glow of the nightlight. She drifted off almost instantly, as if the confrontation at that table, the words, the tension, the crack in the world we had walked through together, had been nothing more than a passing dream. But for me, the night stretched long and restless, each tick of the clock carving deeper into my thoughts. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop replaying that moment, that photo, the look on Robert's face. That photo. I couldn't even remember the last time I had seen it with my own eyes. Maybe years ago, maybe longer. I had shoved it into some forgotten drawer somewhere lost in the chaos of moving apartments, of rebuilding a life they never approved of. I had no idea he still kept it. And the question that kept circling, gnawing at the edges of my mind, refused to let me go. Why keep a picture of someone you ridicule? Why hold on to a memory of someone you insist is broken? The contradiction pressed against me like a bruise I couldn't stop poking. Morning arrived on weary feet, and with it a knock at the door I wasn't expecting. When I opened it, I found a small battered package on the doormat, my name scrawled across the label in Walt's familiar shaky handwriting that looked more fragile than I remembered. I brought it inside my hands, trembling more from curiosity than fatigue, and carefully peeled back the brown paper wrapping to reveal a hand-carved wooden frame, one of his from the days when woodworking was his quiet rebellion against the world. And inside, it tucked lovingly into the carved grooves, was that same photograph, the one from Robert's wallet. Behind the photo, folded in half, was a note written in Walt's shaky pen, the ink slightly smudged as if his hand had trembled as he wrote. "Even broken things can hold the most value," it read. "Some people don't know how to see it, but I do. Keep building yourself. Love, W." I sat there on the scuffed linoleum floor of my cramped kitchen, the morning light creeping in through the tiny window above the sink, tears slipping down my cheeks without sound, without apology. Not because I was sad, but because someone finally, mercifully, had seen me. Truly seen me. Not my mother. Not my father. Not my brother. My child and my grandfather. The 2 people who mattered most. The only ones who ever saw the cracks and didn't look away. I placed the frame on the windowsill, where the sunlight caught the edges every morning, now bathing the image in soft gold. A daily reminder that I wasn't broken. I had been buried beneath their judgments, their labels, their suffocating definitions of success and failure. And now, slowly, patiently, I was unearthing. Healing didn't come in waves of fireworks or grand declarations. It came softly like sunlight, filtering through a cracked curtain, warming the cold corners of my life in quiet, persistent ways. The days after that dinner unfolded in that same hush. There were no calls, no texts, no half-hearted apologies. My phone remained silent, and for the first time the emptiness didn't sting. I wasn't waiting anymore. I no longer needed them to fill the spaces they had never truly occupied. For so long I had convinced myself I needed closure, some grand final word that would stitch the wound closed, make the story neat and tidy. I thought if I said the right thing, made the right choices, proved myself in the right ways, they would finally open the door and let me back in. But what I finally understood was this: there was never a door. The house had never been safe to begin with. What I needed wasn't their acceptance. It was my own. That photo frame stayed on the windowsill, watching over my mornings as I brewed coffee, packed Emily's lunches, washed dishes. Every glimpse reminded me of who I had once been and who I was becoming again. The woman in that photograph was exhausted, hair-tangled eyes rimmed with sleep deprivation, but there was a light in her smile I hadn't seen in years. She didn't care what the world thought of her. She was alive in the moment, holding her daughter, breathing in the triumph of survival. I began doing small things to reconnect with that woman, not sweeping gestures, no loud proclamations, just quiet acts of reclamation. I bought myself a real chair for our tiny kitchen table, solid and sturdy, no more folding chairs of shame. I stopped shrinking when people asked what I did for work. I spoke the truth, unapologetic and clear. I said no, and I stopped feeling like I owed anyone an explanation. And with each small act, I felt the fractured pieces of myself click back into place like bones resetting after a long, painful break. Weeks later, as we sat at the table, Emily, ever perceptive, asked me, "Why didn't you say something back to them? Mommy, like, something mean." I paused, knowing she deserved not just an answer, but the lesson beneath it. Because I didn't want to match their cruelty, I told her, my voice soft, deliberate. "Sometimes sweetheart walking away is louder than yelling." She nodded slowly as if the weight of it made sense to her young heart. "Well," she added with a smirk, "only an 8-year-old could pull off 'I'm glad I said something.'" I smiled, feeling the warmth bloom in my chest. "Me too," I whispered. She didn't understand the full weight of what she had done that night. Not yet. But one day she would realize that her voice at that table gave me something I had been too afraid to give myself permission. Permission to stop performing, to stop begging for scraps of love in rooms that had always been locked against me. Permission to build my own damn table, with seats reserved only for those who loved without conditions. People like her, people like Walt. Not everyone gets that moment, that line drawn in the sand, that person who stands for you before you remember how to stand for yourself. But if you've ever been made to feel small, like you're the problem, the disappointment, the broken one, I want you to hear me now. You are not trash. You are not disposable. You are not the version of yourself that makes others comfortable. You are allowed to take up space, to speak, to change, to walk away. And if no one has ever stood up for you before, let this story be your beginning. Because maybe you were never broken at all. Maybe you were just buried beneath the weight of who they told you to be. And now you have permission to dig yourself out. And if you found even a flicker of yourself in this story, I'd love for you to share it. Maybe someone else needs to hear it too. If it meant something to you, give this story a like, leave a comment. Tell me your story. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing these raw, real moments together. Thank you for being here, for feeling this with me. Until next time, protect your peace and always, always choose the seat where you feel powerful.